How does the Hindu pantheon of gods fit together?
First, divine personalities that would eventually become major deities. Especially Vishnu and Shiva, emerged from among the Vedic pantheon. Ancient lore from all over India contributed to the gradual fleshing out of stories of the major deities. Meanwhile, stories of other names and forms of lesser divine beings continued to develop a life of their own in various regions of India. As major communities of belief formed around stories of Vishnu, Shiva, and their various female counterparts, larger mythic frameworks evolved to integrate narratives of lesser deities into those of the greater deities. For example, Vaishnavite tradition developed the structure of Vishnu's 10 avatars or descents. That mythic framework brought together an astonishing assortment of descriptions of God's involvement in human affairs. The first 3 avatars are non-human divine interventions in the birth of the cosmos. Matsya, the fish, Kurm, the tortoise, and Varha, the boar. 3 avatars represent divine confrontation with evil and demonic forces. Narasingha, the man-lion, Vamana, the dwarf, and Parshurama, Rama with the axe. The 2 most popular avatars are those of Rama and Krishna, heroes both on and off the field of combat, whose consorts Sita and Radha are of nearly equal importance. As a statement of its even greater inclusiveness, the list includes the Buddha himself. Avatar number 10 is the dark and mysterious Kalki, the only avatar yet to come, whose task is to bring an apocalyptic end to the present age. Integrating Shiva imagery is the concept of Shiva's holy family. Both Vishnu and Shiva have their consorts, Lakshmi or Bhu, and Parvati, Durga, or Kali respectively. Unlike Vishnu, Shiva has children. Stories of Ganesha and Skanda brought these formerly local or regional deities into the larger structure of the divine family. Finally, a concept known as the triple form, Trimurti, unites the whole complex of images by identifying a trinity of divine roles. Brahma, never an object of great popular devotion, creates. Vishnu sustains. And Shiva destroys, paving the way for renewal of the endless cosmic process.
What is original sin?
According to mainstream Christian tradition, the story Adam and Eve is critical to an understanding of the relationship between human beings and their Creator. According to Genesis 2:16-17 and 3:1-24, God commanded these first human beings not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A tempter tried to persuade them that God was merely defending his own turf in order to prevent Adam and Eve from becoming like himself. Once the primordial couple succumbed to the lure of such dangerous knowledge, they became aware of their potential for disobedience and lost their pristine innocence. Christian theologians have interpreted this critical moment in human history, known as the Fall, in various ways. From the time of the early Church Fathers on through the Middle Ages, theologians have discussed how the descendants of Adam and Eve inherited both their guilt and their inherent moral weakness. Protestant reformers stimulated further debate in the context of their discussion of faith and works.
What is the relationship between Daoism and martial arts?
Early each morning, nearly everywhere in China, people gather in public places both large and small to practice a slow graceful routine of physical movements called Tai Chi Chuan. People of all ages can engage in this activity. Though it is not strenuous the way higher speed exercises can be, Tai Chi, also commonly spelled Tai Chi, nevertheless puts noticeable demands on an astonishingly wide range of muscles all over the body. The idea is not simple physical toning, however, even though that is an obvious benefit. Its purpose is to maintain or restore one's overall sense of health and well-being through relaxed concentration. Proper practice relieves blockages of vital energy and returns the whole person to balance and harmony both physically and spiritually. Tai Chi routines and styles are varied, with 3 methods called Chen, Wu, and Yang most common nowadays. Many of the underlying principles in the practice are of Daoist origin and remain a regular part of the regimen in many Daoist monasteries. But it seems more reasonable on the whole to identify Tai Chi as a more generically Chinese phenomenon, since for centuries non-Daoists have made use of it with no apparent direct connection with Daoist beliefs. As for its relationship to actual martial arts, Tai Chi movement is based on the notion that non-aggressiveness, what is called being weak like water, is ultimately more effective than trying to overwhelm one's opponent with brute force. Hence, for example, the Japanese term judo derives from a Chinese term, rodeo, that means the way of yielding.
Are there mythic elements in Hindu tradition?
Hinduism's sacred texts comprise one of the world's greatest treasure troves of myth. Non-Hindus, especially Westerners who find themselves inclined to discount Hindu tradition as just a collection of stories, are shutting the door to that watershed of insight called the imagination. All religious traditions build on a master story composed of accounts about how the world came to be, what human beings are all about, and the relationship between humankind and the greater being or power responsible for the shape of things. Some traditions, such as the Abrahamic faiths, wrap themselves around narratives they call their sacred history. Other traditions, such as Hinduism and Buddhism, for example, consider human history much too small a stage for any drama under the direction of the ultimate reality. History begins, stretches out, and comes to a definitive end. but the view that history is all about what actually happened while myth is purely imaginary is seriously flawed. History and myth are two very different ways to answer the big questions about human life. Sacred history tells how God has worked in the world by identifying certain events as the result of divine intervention. Mythic narrative tells the story of the otherness of ultimate reality by stretching the limits of the imagination. History works from the ground up, so to speak, and turns around the power of memory. While myth starts with mystery and cultivates the human capacity for wonder. What non-Hindus may be tempted to criticize as a weakness in Hindu tradition, Hindus regard as their tradition's great strength. Both approaches yield important forms of narrative theology. Far from being simply contradictory, myth and history complement each other.
What is a minion?
When Jews gather for worship, they need a minimum number in attendance, or quorum. Orthodox tradition excludes women from being counted toward the minimum of 10 members over 13 years of age. But both Reformed and conservative traditions have in recent times voted to count women in the minyan. The accommodation presupposes that women in the local community have passed their bat mitzvah, a rite of passage not open to Orthodox women. The notion of a religious quorum seems to rest on a fairly clear distinction between private and public worship. Since public or communal worship is of a different order than private worship, tradition draws a clear line between them. So when there are not enough people to form a minyan, everyone returns home or prays privately in the synagogue.
What does the term revelation mean in Christian tradition?
Christianity's central teaching on divine revelation is that God has become fully manifest in the person of Jesus Christ through the incarnation. Jesus himself is the eternal Word of God and Son, who took on human nature and lived among humankind. Tradition situates this humanly embodied revelation within the broader context of God's progressive and ongoing self-disclosure in a wide variety of ways. Most prominently, Christians believe God has revealed divine truths through the Hebrew and Greek Testaments. For both scriptures point to the Christ. Through the Holy Spirit, Christians discern the continued revealing, clarifying presence of God in the days since Jesus departed this world.
What gender-related issues have been important in Confucianism and CIT?
Confucian tradition emphasized social order, and that called for clearly delineated gender functions. Given the conviction that only a patriarchal structure could guarantee social order, What many people today call social equality was simply not included in the Confucian lexicon. Confucian teaching envisioned male-female relationships according to a political model. First and foremost among questions of gender are those relating to family structure and roles. But whether within the family or in society at large, women and younger people generally shared the expectation of dutiful obedience. Women remained in the home to serve the family, which sometimes brought as many as 4 generations together in one household. Widows were typically expected not to remarry. When a wife produced no son, a husband could marry one or more secondary wives in the hope of securing a male heir. A telling fact is that no women are numbered among the great sages and scholars memorialized in Confucius temples. In the imperial household, there were sometimes several empresses and many royal concubines. An empress remained out of view for the most part, participating in a few affairs of state annually. Eunuchs looked after the harem, strictly organizing the lives of all women in the imperial household.
How did Gautama become the Buddha?
At the age of 29, tradition says, Gautama made the great renunciation of comfort and security. Borne aloft by his horse, he went over the palace walls to pursue a realistic understanding of the world and the human condition. Gautama went first to learn from 2 Hindu teachers, spiritual guides like those who tutor seekers in the Hindu scriptures called the Upanishads. Unsatisfied with that more philosophical approach, Gautama joined a group of ascetics in Benares. Representatives of the Jain movement perhaps, and subjected himself to several years of dire austerity. When that, too, failed, he moved on and decided to meditate alone under a tree until he achieved enlightenment. During the course of 7 weeks there, Siddhartha went through 4 trance-like stages, arriving finally at the stark realization of what Buddhist tradition calls the most basic truths of human life. Siddhartha was now worthy of the name Buddha, the enlightened one. But tradition suggests that the Buddha experienced a terrible interior struggle with the temptation to keep his newfound wisdom to himself. Mara, the demon, summoned up all his might to prevent the truths of enlightenment from spreading abroad. Overcoming all inclination to selfishness, the 35-year-old Buddha dedicated himself to teaching others the way to freedom from attachment that is the cause of all suffering. He returned to Benares, reunited with the 5 ascetics with whom he had parted company earlier, and preached the sermon called Turning the Wheel of the Law. Now the Buddha was indeed a wheel turner, but not as his father had envisioned. For the next 45 years, he would turn the greatest of all wheels, that of the Dharma. He died in Kushinagara at the age of 80, in about 463 BCE, of apparent food poisoning. Buddha on the big screen, some favorite motion pictures. Green Snake, 1993. A combination of mysticism and action based on a Chinese fable. Green Snake, Maggie Chung, and Sun Qing, Joey Wang, are actual reptiles who have been practicing taking human form. When self-righteous Buddhist monk Fa Hai discovers them, he thinks it's a sin to tamper with the natural order. Cantonese with English subtitles. Kundan. 1997, in 1937, in a remote area of Tibet close to the Chinese border, a 2-year-old child is identified as the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, the compassionate Buddha. He is brought to Lhasa to be schooled as a monk and as head of state. The film follows him into adulthood until his flight to India after the Chinese invasion of Tibet. Little Buddha. 1993, Tibetan Lama Norbu informs the Conrad family of Seattle that their 10-year-old son Jesse may be the reincarnation of a respected monk. Stars Keanu Reeves? 7 years in Tibet. 1997, Heinrich Harrer, Brad Pitt, travels to the Himalayas on a mountain climbing trip. War breaks out and he is placed in a prisoner of war camp. He escapes to Tibet where he befriends the young Dalai Lama and witnesses the escalation of the conflict between Tibet and China. Temptation of a monk. 1994, costume drama about China's 7th century Tang dynasty. General Shi, Wu Xianguo, is duped into an assassination plot against the crown prince. After a massacre, the general flees and finds sanctuary with a group of Buddhist monks at a remote temple. Why has Bodhidharma left for the East? 1989. Set in a remote monastery in the Korean mountains, the film follows an old master, close to death, who must lead his disciples in their search for spiritual freedom. Korean with English subtitles.
How did CIT structure its main ritual activities?
CIT rituals were arranged in a symbolic hierarchical order that coordinated the authority of those performing the rituals with the various ranks of the CIT pantheon. To symbolize universal dominion, the emperor would make offerings to the powers controlling all 4 cardinal directions, to all mountains and rivers, and to the 5 domestic sacrifices. On lower levels, ritual responsibilities reflected a division of labor and authority. Imperial princes made offerings only to the power ruling their own quarters of the universe and the associated mountains and rivers, and to the 5 domestic sacrifices. These took place at regional sacred sites. In turn, the prince's chief officers were to perform only the domestic offerings, and their subordinates only the offerings to their own ancestors. These last rituals occurred in home settings and in cemeteries. Specific rituals include many of the same kinds of actions deists or practitioners of CCT engage in. Ritual specialists generally purified themselves for the ceremonies by fasting and ablutions before making offerings to divine powers of the top level in the pantheon. Specialists fasted for 3 days, and for second-level deities, 2 days. During times of fasting, ritualists were especially careful to avoid certain strong foods. garlic and onions, and fermented beverages. An essential ingredient in the preparatory period was avoidance of contact with death and disease. Festivities and music were put aside. Central to the actual worship ceremonies was the offering of food, wine, and incense, along with prayers of petition and physical prostration before the deities.
What is the importance of the month of Ramadan?
During pre-Islamic times, the month called Ramadan, high summer, was religiously significant as a time during which the Arab tribes observed a truce from all hostilities. Of all the months, the Quran mentions only Ramadan by name, identifying it as the month during which the scripture was revealed. Scripture suggests that the initial divine revelation is the reason for the practice of fasting throughout the month. Ramadan begins with the sighting of the new moon on the last night of the 8th month. Each day, from dawn until sunset, Muslims are enjoined to fast from all food and liquid, as well as from sexual activity and other forms of sensual pleasure. Fasting also means refraining from negative attitudes and complaining, and developing a sense of solidarity with those who suffer from want all year long. After Muslims break the fast with some water and dates, they eat a meal before retiring. Before dawn they may have another meal, but limit other forms of celebration during the entire month. Special prayers are scheduled in mosques, along with the recitation of one of 30 sections of the Quran, completing the entire sacred text over the 30 nights. A number of important dates fall during Ramadan. Most important is the Night of Power, one of the odd-numbered nights among the last 10, usually observed on the 27th. Muslims believe that God's initial revelation to Muhammad makes this the holiest time of the entire year. Other important times during Ramadan include the birthday of the martyr Hussein, 6th, death of Muhammad's first wife Khadija, 10th, the Battle of Badr, a key event in 625, the 17th, the retaking of Mecca in 630, 19th. The deaths of Ali and of the 8th Shia Imam, Ali Reza, 21st, and Ali's birthday, 22nd. Where Muslims are in the majority or a very sizable minority, the rhythm of life slows dramatically during Ramadan. At the sighting of the next new moon, all rejoice in the feast of fast breaking, Eid al-Fitr.
What are the 10 paramitas, great virtues, of the Bodhisattva?
The following 10 virtues are to be attained after continuing efforts in numerous past lives as Buddha to be: charity, morality, renunciation, wisdom, effort, patience, truth, determination, universal love, equanimity.
Have there been any important Confucian reformers?
Wang Yangming, 1472 to 1529 CE, was an outspoken government official of the Ming dynasty. He was perhaps the most influential teacher of the Neo-Confucian school of mind. Also known as the idealists, Xin Shui. Wang believed that the teaching of his predecessors in the Neo-Confucian movement had lost all credibility when Yuan dynasty bureaucrats made it the official curriculum for civil service examinations. Reduced to a fixed set of questions and answers, Neo-Confucian ideas no longer required people to think independently. Wang's major work, Investigation into the Great Learning, commented on the ancient Confucian text, underscoring the need for active engagement with ideas. He condemned slavish adherence to rigid canons of ritual propriety. Wang argued for an understanding of Li as a living universal principle rather than a list of prescribed procedures and policies. He borrowed from Daoist and Buddhist teachings, as earlier Neo-Confucians had done, attempting to reinvigorate the tradition as a way of interpreting the whole of life. And Wang reintroduced a metaphysical element by speaking of a true self and a heavenly principle. Above all, he insisted, one must not lose sight of the underlying challenge of human development and the struggle for moral improvement. Institutionalize what is meant to be a living tradition, Wang warned, and you create a giant fossil.
How do religious communities structure their internal administrations?
Structure and organization generally relate more or less directly to the role and shape of authority within a religious tradition. There are, for example, various levels of organization such as denominations and sects. Here one finds a variety of structures ranging from rigidly hierarchical to egalitarian. Hierarchically oriented traditions, such as Roman and English Catholicism, 12-er Shia Islam, or the Mormons, often feature a pyramid of power capped by a single figure who can wield enormous moral and juridical authority. Just below that leader there is sometimes a rank or two of administrators who hold jurisdiction over specified territories within the tradition's geographic expanse. In some cases those top administrators may form a deliberative body or council that advises the leader in matters of tradition-wide importance. On the next rung or two down toward the base of the pyramid there will typically be ranks of administrative and pastoral offices charged with the daily affairs of the smallest community units where most members gather. Smaller religious traditions enjoy the practical luxury of opting for more egalitarian structures with fewer administrative offices. Whether large or small, all traditions have to deal with the practicalities of how their administrations are chosen. In some hierarchical structures the top official is elected by the members of the highest deliberative body, whose members in turn are appointed by the head. In others, such as Shia Islam, the process by which both the head and those next in rank are chosen is more a matter of public acclaim. In still other traditions with prominent official classification, such as Temple Hinduism and Shinto, the priesthood is often associated with family and heredity and is typically entered for life. In the most egalitarian communities, all administrators are chosen democratically, serving either for set terms of office or indefinitely at the pleasure of the local community.
Are shamans the same as priests?
Shamans belong to the large, general category of priest, which is in turn part of the still larger category of ritual specialist. Women seem to be better represented in the ranks of shamans. Depending on the cultural setting, than in priesthoods. In some traditions shamans are called medicine men or women. A shaman's training tends to include more closely guarded secrets than that of a priest, with greater emphasis on esoteric and arcane practices. Whereas priests more often perform their services as part of larger public settings. The work of the shaman also includes a great deal of private communing with the world of spirits. Shamanistic rites typically involve trances or loss of control, and often include exorcism to expel undesirable spiritual forces. Shamans are key figures in many indigenous or tribal traditions. Even though shamans do not generally find an official place in the major religious traditions, they often appear around the fringes. And the more closely a tradition's beliefs and practices are tied to nature, the more likely will the tradition's ritual specialists share characteristics of the shaman. Some features of shamanistic lore, however, have made their way into the heritage of major traditions. For example, stories in which a prophet or other important personality journeys beyond this world on a trip. That can include tours of the various levels of heaven and hell can suggest roots in a shamanistic past.
Are statues and other visual imagery important in Daoist and CCT temples?
With the notable exception of major Confucian and imperial temples, Chinese ritual spaces are almost always filled with images of deities and other sacred figures. Principal deities occupy main altar spaces, but they often share the central spot with smaller images of other sacred figures arranged below the main image and toward the front of the altar. For many centuries deists and practitioners of CCT evidently felt no need for anthropomorphic depictions of their deities. The advent of Buddhism, with its growing iconographic repertoire, seems to have been an important factor in the development of Chinese religious representational imagery. Images of Daoist deities, and of those that originated outside Daoist circles but are often identified as Daoist by association, run a wide gamut. Some of the deities are of divine origin. Others began as human beings, either historical or legendary, and achieved divine status either in life or after death. in addition to statues, colorful banners, low relief in stone and other media, and mural paintings depict mythological and other scenes meant to keep the worshipper in the proper frame of mind. Even temples that began as Buddhist institutions and which still display distinctively Buddhist imagery in their main shrines and altars have often become transformed into CCT temples by accretion over the centuries. Whatever the individual deity's life history, anthropomorphic images abound.
What are some of the main varieties of Islamic religious officials or specialists?
Islamic religious specialists are a large general class of people called ulama, meaning those who possess knowledge, ilm. An alim, pronounced a'lim, commonly used singular of ulama, pronounced oulamaah, is an individual who has done extensive study of the Quran, tafsir, exegetical commentary, and hadith, for starters. Some become specialists in Quran recitation. One who memorizes the entire text and learns to recite it in an elaborate and demanding style called tajwid. Pronounced tajweed, embellished. Excellent, is called a qari, pronounced kaahri, professional Quran reciter. Some religious scholars further specialize in religious jurisprudence, fiqh, understanding. Such a scholar is called a faqih, pronounced faqih, one who understands deeply. Because he applies his intellect to plumb the depths of the fundamental religious sources in an effort to apply their principles to daily life. Some religious scholars routinely engage in the categorization of various acts according to their relative legal and moral acceptability. In that capacity the scholar is called a mufti, pronounced mufti. One who issues a legal advisory called a fatwa, pronounced fatwa. Specialists in the religious sciences often carry the honorific title of sheikh. Elder, a term that was reserved for tribal leaders during pre-Islamic times. Spiritual guides of the various Sufi organizations called orders or paths, tariqa, pronounced ta'ariqa, also generally bear the title of sheikh or its Persian equivalent, pir, pronounced pir.
Are there any sub-communities or denominations within Shinto?
Numerous varieties and schools of Shinto have come and gone over the past 1300 years. Here briefly are a few of the more important, an ascetical mountain sect called Shugendo began as early as the Nara period, 710 to 794, and small groups remain active today. Beginning during the Middle Ages, several schools have arisen under the patronage of important members of powerful clans, now identified by the names of those families or of the school's individual founders. The larger groups are Urabe, also known by the later family name of Yashida, and Uiitsu-Unification Shinto, Watarai, also called Ise Shinto, the Confucian-oriented school of Yoshikawa. And Kurozumaikyo, named after its 19th-century founder. Several other schools are identified by terms that suggest their principal teaching or emphases. For example, a 17th-century school called Suga, bestowal of blessings. Shinto laid groundwork for the growth of national learning. Suno Ichijutsu blended Shinto themes with esoteric teachings of Tendai Buddhism in the 17th century. Focusing on the divine manifestation of a mountain king. Finally, Minkan Shinko is a general designation for a host of developments called folk religious beliefs and practices, incorporating elements of Shinto as well as other traditions. Japanese governments have promulgated various types of legislation, especially since the late 19th century, aimed at keeping track of the many religious groups that have occasionally leveled severe criticism at the imperial form of governance.
What was the religion in ancient Egypt?
Religion was the very core of ancient Egyptian culture, 3500 BCE 950 BCE. It permeated every aspect of life, including art, medicine, and science. Egyptians believed that the gods had created Egypt as an oasis of order and inherent good amidst the forces of chaos that constantly threatened to overwhelm them. Justice, morality, and beauty called Ma'at by the Egyptians consisted of behavior in accordance with that tradition. The Egyptian religion featured many deities, some strange but with human features. Others clearly non-human, but all responsible for every aspect of life, from birth to death. The king of the gods was Amon-Re, followed by Aten, the disk that symbolized the sun god. Osiris, the god of both the Nile and the realm of the dead, and Isis, the moon goddess, wife of Osiris, mother of the universe, and queen of the world. Each god was associated with a particular sacred animal: cat, bull, crocodile, or scarab, beetle, and huge temples were dedicated to their worship. In these temples, which were run by priests, the gods and goddesses made contact with humans through cult statues. Ordinary people prayed at the temple gates and were not normally allowed inside, though they were offered a peek at the Egyptian gods during great processions.
Do deists and practitioners of CCT make pilgrimages?
Pilgrimage has long been integral to most of the major Chinese religious traditions. The Chinese term typically translated as making pilgrimage, Chao Shan Jin Xiang, actually means paying respects to a mountain by presenting incense. Beginning in at least the 4th century CE and growing dramatically from the 8th to 12th centuries. Pilgrimage practices of the various traditions came to be identified with certain specific mountains, with some mountains claimed by more than one tradition. Once identified as a particularly sacred place, a mountain became the site of one or more temples. Eventually deists and others developed elaborate sacred geographies, mapped out with reference to the major sacred peaks or ranges. Pilgrimage to the sacred mountains thus became a symbolic journey through the universe. On some mountains, such as Wudangshan, deists have constructed miniature versions of the macro cosm, identifying its subdivisions with such enchanting names as Jade Void, Primordial Harmony, Purple Empyrean, and Perfect Felicity. Mountains are the dwelling places of the gods and immortals, and as such, naturally became favorite places of retreat for deist scholars and masters. Mountain settings have other, more primal, symbolism for deists as well. They embody the perfect harmony of male yang and female yin. Deep within mountain caves, spiritual seekers could contact the eternal feminine energies. Popular pilgrimage has generally revolved around visits to the mountain temples rather than around extended spiritual retreat. A deity called generically the Old Man of the Mountain, often depicted with his pet tiger, appears in many temples all over Asia, including Buddhist sites, making a symbolic pilgrimage possible even for those who cannot manage the actual journey. Today, various organizations arrange pilgrimage tours to any of several dozen sacred sites in the People's Republic and in Taiwan.
How do Christians mark formal entry into their various faith communities?
Along with the Lord's Supper, baptism is one of the two rituals the vast majority of Christians recognize as a sacrament. Its symbolism recalls the cleansing waters of the flood and the crossing of the Red Sea and Jordan. Essential elements in baptism are flowing water and the formula "I baptize you," or "the servant of God is baptized, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." Infant baptism was the norm until the Reformation. Catholic, Orthodox, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, and Congregational churches still baptize infants, while some churches defer the ritual until the candidate is a teenager or older. Baptism can be administered by total or partial immersion, with the candidate descending into a pool or with the officiant lowering the infant into a font, or by effusion, in which the officiant pours water over the candidate's head only.
Have deists traditionally sent out missionaries to convert others?
Daoism generally has not been a mission-oriented tradition. There have been periods in the history of China during which deist authorities have made it clear that life would be more difficult for non-deists. A number of Chinese emperors espoused Daoism as the official state creed, in effect, and attempted to cleanse the realm of Buddhists. And there have been times when deists have been in serious competition with Confucians. But on the whole, Systematic missionary activity is not the essential ingredient in Daoism that it has been in Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity. When Daoism and CCT have spread, they have done so largely as a result of migration of Chinese merchant families.
What sort of symbols and signs will I see in a Hindu temple?
First, you will remove your shoes as a sign of respect for a holy place. And to help keep it clean, since worshippers often sit on the floor. Very near the door you will see an image or statue of the elephant-headed deity called Ganesha. One of Shiva's two sons, Ganesha is the guardian of openings, beginnings, and travelers, and he generally bestows blessings on worshippers as they enter. Even Vaishnavite temples usually have a Ganesha at the door. Along the side walls you may see smaller shrines containing images of deities important in one or another denomination but secondary to this particular temple's devotional focus. Straight ahead you will see the central shrine, perhaps flanked by a pair of subordinate shrines holding images of deities directly related to the one in the central shrine. For example, if the temple is primarily dedicated to a manifestation of Vishnu called Sri Venkateshvara, as are temples in Pittsburgh and St. Louis, flanking shrines might house Krishna and Radha on one side and Rama with wife Sita, brother Lakshmana, and the monkey assistant Hanuman on the other. The subordinate shrines may have prominent spires somewhat shorter than that of the central shrine. If the temple serves a large and diverse community, other side rooms may be devoted to other deities. Vishnu's consort, Lakshmi, goddess of wealth and success, often has her own shrine, sometimes with a shikhara, whose external elevation is slightly lower than those of the central shrine and its flanking shrines. Another room might house one large and several smaller shrines dedicated to Shiva and his holy family. In the main Shiva shrine you will see an abstract symbol of power and blessing called the Linga Yoni, the principal and iconic symbol of Shiva. Alongside, smaller shrines will display images of Parvati, Shiva's wife, and their two sons, Ganesha and Skanda, also known as Kartikeya and Murugan. Many, if not all, images will be elaborately clothed and festooned with floral garlands. Decorative themes on the shrines might include images of guardian figures called doorkeepers and other protective symbols that look like small lion faces.
What is an ascetic?
An ascetic is a person who engages in a demanding exercise. From the Greek askesis, in the interest of spiritual progress. One of the ascetic's chief goals is freedom from the encumbrances of material existence. Various forms of self-denial and increased attentiveness to inner movements of spirit are therefore at the heart of ascetic practice. Fasting, use of the simplest possible clothing and other material needs, and the cultivation of solitude are common themes in ascetic discipline. In many religious traditions, ascetics are known for their observance of silence for long periods. Ascetics vigorously pursue detachment from all that is not conducive to realizing one's nothingness in the face of ultimate reality. These spiritual athletes often appear to others to be going to unhealthy extremes, and in relation to widespread societal norms of ordinary behavior, they can indeed be extremists. Some ascetics are known for such practices as sitting atop pillars for long periods, staring at a blank wall for years, or lowering themselves headfirst into the depths of a well. But there is another important way of understanding asceticism. Every human being who works hard at living a good life practices asceticism at some level. The ordinary disciplines of dealing with life's predictable setbacks, of treating others with consistent kindness, and of shouldering all of one's responsibilities are forms of asceticism. Most religious people must make the most of the ordinary opportunities, allowing their traditions' professional ascetics to remind them occasionally of the need to look deeper in the quest for spiritual freedom.
What is the Daoism?
Daoist stories of how the world came to be are full of mythic features similar to those of other cosmogonies. They tell how order overcame chaos, how the heavens and earth came to be separated, and how the innumerable deities, 36,000 according to one reckoning, fit into the grand picture. What is unique and most interesting about Daoist myth is that the gods do not necessarily take an active role in cosmic affairs. They do not intervene in the unfolding cosmos, nor even nudge the process along, for that matter. Instead, they allow the fundamental laws of creation itself to operate unimpeded. Indeed, the gods themselves come into being as part of this whole unfolding set in motion by an impersonal power called heaven.
Is there a Daoist or CCT creed?
Since religious Daoism and CCT emphasize practice over correct belief, they have not formulated the equivalent of creedal summaries such as those of Judaism, Islam, and even Buddhism. Daoism and CCT do, of course, presuppose certain basic beliefs and assumptions about how the world works. Most of those beliefs have to do with discerning and understanding how to cope with and benefit from the spiritual forces inherent in all things. All of the varieties of religious Daoism and CCT, therefore, have their core beliefs. But affirming one's assent to them pales in insignificance when compared to the importance of grasping the essential skills needed to negotiate life's daily challenges.
Shouldn't a religious tradition be more invested in turning people's attention to a world beyond this one?
In fact, these and other distinctive aspects of Shinto are among its strengths and the basis for its unique contributions to our world. Shinto offers arresting insights into the inherent divine quality of the simplest things, of the beauty hidden away in life's nooks and crannies. Shinto tradition discerns innumerable causes for profound gratitude to the powers beyond the merely human that make life itself possible. Shinto may not be celebrated for producing sophisticated schools of theological speculation, but it undoubtedly possesses many characteristics that identify it as a religious tradition.
What kind of religious calendar do Jews observe?
The Jewish liturgical calendar combines elements of both lunar and solar reckoning. Lunar months are 29 or 30 days long, and the first month of the year is that in which the Exodus began. But tradition dictates that certain feasts must occur during certain seasons. So the calendar has to be adjusted every so often to prevent the lunar months from straying too far from the agricultural, or solar, cycle. To make it work, an extra month, called Adar Sheni, second Adar, is added during 7 out of every 19 years. The Jewish lunar months are called Tishri, September/October, Cheshvan, October/November. Kislev, November/December, Teves, December/January, Shavat, January/February, Adar, February/March. Adar Sheni, second Adar, inserted only in leap years, Nisan, March/April, Iyar. April/May, Sivan, May/June, Tammuz, June/July, Av, July/August, and Elul, August/September. With the leap year provision, the lunar months slide back or forward but remain within the solar months indicated in parentheses.
Does Daoism have any annual celebrations?
For virtually every temple community, the principal deity's birthday provides the occasion for a major yearly festivity. Celebrants focus on the temple and the main icon, sprucing up the building and decking out the deity in new finery. In addition, there are dozens of other special days. The new year emphasizes fresh start, with Lao Zi's feast on the first day and special prayers to the Jade Pure One on the 8th and the Jade Emperor on the 9th day of the first month. The latter is a lengthy festivity that culminates on the 15th with the Lantern Festival. Clear and bright falls on the first day of the third month. In mainland China this is not lunar but occurs always on April 5. Its main thrust is to remember the dead, maintain burial places, and offer ritual meals at the graves. Dragon boat races on the 5th day of the 5th month commemorate the drowning of a poet of old. More important, however, is the association of that month with the need to ward off spirits of disease at a time when With the summer solstice approaching, yin energy begins to replace yang as the dominant energy. CCT devotees celebrate Guan Yin's ascension to heaven on the 19th of the 6th month, during which people also mark the midpoint in the year. On the 7th day of the 7th month, people observe the only night when the weaving maid and the cowherd, a celestial couple, can be together. And the 15th marks the birthday of a deist deity called the Earth Controller, known in CCT as the Emperor Sage Shun. Numerous rituals acknowledging the need to placate the wandering dead occupy many during the 7th month. Most prominent is the Ghost Festival on the 15th day, when people seek to propitiate the spirits by leaving food out for them. Deist masters now officiate at the occasion, which was formerly a Buddhist observance. A mid-autumn celebration of the moon goddess's birthday. Once a harvest festival, occurs on the 15th of the 8th month. On the 9th day of the 9th month, called double yang because of the auspicious nature of the number 9. People once sought protection in amulets and fled lowland evil by taking to the hills. Nowadays, most people simply go for walks in the cool fresh autumn air. On the 15th of month 10, worshippers mark the birthday of a deist deity called the Controller of the Waters, known in CCT as the Sage Yu. A winter festivity marks the solstice during the 11th month. Before the 12th month is even half spent, planning begins for the new year.
What is enlightenment?
In Buddhist tradition, the term enlightenment means the simple, clear realization of the most basic truths about life. It presupposes the utmost attentiveness to whatever one is experiencing as one experiences it. And for that reason it sounds too simple and ordinary to be worth pursuing. But enlightenment begins and ends precisely with the simple and the ordinary. It is the realization that the headlong pursuit of pleasure, hedonism, and the dogged avoidance of pleasure, extreme asceticism, both yield the same results, suffering. Hope fuels the one, fear the other. Both are a flight from the real as it confronts every individual in the here and now. Enlightenment means grasping the fundamental realities summed up in Buddhism's Four Noble Truths. First, life is difficult. Look around. As the four passing sights taught Siddhartha, the human condition includes some hard inescapable realities. This first truth is not as pessimistic as it might sound. It is the ultimate in realism. If human beings had the power to change the basic realities we experience, we would have done so long ago. But we can change the ways we respond to experience. Second, all that hardship and suffering comes from inappropriate attachment or grasping. Whatever I must either have or avoid will finally make me suffer. If I get what I want, it will soon disappoint. If I manage to avoid for a time what I fear most, something else will soon replace it. There is a solution in the third truth, To avoid suffering, avoid inappropriate craving. Under ordinary circumstances, no human being can stop craving altogether. The Buddha nearly killed himself with austerities before he realized the futility of such an approach.
Do Confucians celebrate the birthdays of any religious figures?
September 28th of each year marks the birthday of Confucius in Taiwan. For example, and there it has also been declared Teachers' Day. In the People's Republic of China, celebrations of the day have been forbidden since the Maoist Revolution of 1948. Largely because of Confucianism's long-standing association with imperial rule. Taiwanese celebrations, however, are still elaborate and traditional. Beginning at 6 in the morning according to ancient practice. Ceremonies commence with ritual drumming followed by a procession in which participants, dressed in ancient regalia, carry in special symbols to welcome the spirit of Confucius. Processional symbols include a royal canopy and fan, as well as ritual long-handled axes. In the capital city, Taipei, the celebration is modeled on the ancient pattern in which literati bureaucrats performed the main rituals. There, the mayor presides over the various ranks of governmental employees and educational administrators, joined by ranks of students of different ages. Birthdays of particular deities or immortals do not play a role in Confucianism or CIT as they do in Daoism and CCT.
Do Confucians believe in miracles?
Some have described Confucian teaching as philosophical in content and religious in function. As such, Confucian tradition focuses on the role of humanity in the greater scheme of things. It does not deny the existence of a divine realm or the power of beings who inhabit that realm. Instead, it emphasizes the importance of each human being's full acceptance of his or her responsibility. About the rest we cannot know in detail. What we have to work with are the myriad small realities we confront every day. Countless wonders await anyone willing to observe carefully each detail of ordinary life. Confucius would not have approved of any approach to life that amounted to waiting for the gods to do what human beings alone are responsible for. As such, Confucian teaching is highly realistic. It does not deny the possibility of miracles, events beyond the ordinary. It merely suggests that people who are genuinely attentive to life as it unfolds already have more than enough to occupy them. Many devoutly religious people think of miracles as the ultimate cause for gratitude.
Do people actually think of all this diversity as part of one religious tradition?
Walk into the nearest institution identified as a Hindu temple, and you know immediately that the answer to the question is yes. Especially outside of India, temples serve devotees from many denominations and sects and therefore include multiple images of the divine presence under one roof. Even in India, where temples typically serve constituencies somewhat less varied, most places of worship display prominent symbols of more than one denomination. Over the centuries, the many sources of religious imagery have come together to form the greater Hinduism as a result of several processes of integration.
Do Buddhists practice rituals of exorcism?
Since the Buddha emphasized that the individual was the only power of ultimate significance in the quest for liberation, he saw no need for formal ritual designed to do away with negative forces. Keen awareness of one's own motives and intentions would take care of all problems. Still, Buddhist practice has absorbed various indigenous forms of exorcism from virtually every culture in which the tradition has taken root. Many of the practices still in use in Japan originated in China and were brought to Japan by founders of Japan's Tendai and Shingon sects in the early 9th century. Japan's Nichiren school, a development of Tendai tradition, acknowledges 4 types of demonic possession. Phenomena range from pain caused by an angry spirit, to hallucinations, to possession by some animal spirit as signaled by personality changes, to severe disorders manifested in multiple personalities and voices. Priests of the Nichiren school undergo strict ascetical preparation before performing an exorcism. Someone close to the possessed person serves as a medium to the spirit world, speaking for the possessed person and delivering answers on behalf of the forces of good. In other cases, the exorcist deals directly with the possessed person. Wearing white, the exorcist recites from the principal Nichiren scripture, the Lotus Sutra, makes sharp noises using a set of wooden castanets, and interrogates the one possessed. Some Buddhists prefer exorcism as an alternative to psychotherapy.
What rites do Hindus practice in the temple?
Puja, meaning adoration or worship, is the generic name for a range of rituals in which devotees engage in the temple. Many temples are open early in the day until early afternoon, and again in early evening. Worshippers arrive at any time during a temple's regular hours, individually or in small groups. They always remove their shoes before entering. Temple priests serve each party in turn, helping them to make their offerings to the deity or deities of their choice. Devotees' choice of deities is based on various factors, including personal need, individual devotion, or sacred times associated with particular deities. While the priests conduct separate rituals, other parties wait their turn, sitting in the open areas of the temple and talking or praying quietly among themselves. Ritual actions emphasize the spiritual symbolism of simple ordinary elements of life such as food, water, warmth, light, and beauty. All in the context of opening oneself inwardly to a closer relationship with the source of life. Puja takes the form of visiting a royal person and offering affectionate and awe-filled gestures. Worshippers take care of the deity by symbolically bathing its feet and offering food and drink. Circumambulation, always to the right. Around the various womb chamber shrines in a temple are a regular part of worship. At set times during the day, the temple staff engage in other worshipful acts apart from the ongoing puja of individuals and groups. They wake, bathe, and feed the deity, and take the sacred royalty out for a walk, so to speak.
Where do Buddhists live today? Are any estimates of numbers available?
Buddhism enjoyed much greater success in other parts of Asia than in India, the land of its birth. Estimates of the global population of Buddhists varies from about a third to 500 million. Political circumstances make statistics particularly hard to get for China and Tibet. But it is clear that Buddhists have suffered terribly in both areas during the past half-century. Meanwhile, the tradition has been enjoying modest revival elsewhere in Asia, and has become increasingly popular in Europe and North America as a result of both immigration and conversion. Nations with the highest percentage of Buddhists among the general population are Thailand, 94%, Cambodia, 90%, Myanmar, formerly Burma, 88%, Japan, 78%, and Korea, 45%. Many millions of Buddhists once lived in China, but their number dwindled dramatically with the advent of the communist system. Buddhism has been making a comeback in China in recent years, and there are now an estimated 13,000 temples and 200,000 monks and nuns. Tibet's population was, until recently at least, almost entirely Buddhist. Between 600,000 and 1 million Buddhists, representing all major denominations, live in the United States.